Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. Well, again, happy Easter. In 1995, I traveled with a group to Israel to tour biblical sites, and on our very first morning, overlooking Jerusalem, I was standing in our hotel and I heard a noise of something crashing in the hallway outside. And then the floor shook, and I thought, wow, whatever fell in the hallway must have been pretty heavy to make the floor shake. And then the floor continued to shake. Items rattled and fell to the floor inside the room. I started to realize in a matter of seconds that whatever had fallen was not the cause of the shaking, but a result of the shaking. It was the first and only earthquake that I've ever experienced. It was 7.1 on the Richter scale. Fortunately for us, we were not at the epicenter, but growing up in Minnesota, I didn't have any experience with something like that. In those first seconds, my mind was just trying to make sense of it all. My first reaction was just shock and confusion. It's not unlike what happened in some ways on Easter. Matthew says there was an earthquake on Easter morning that rolled the stone away. The earthquake and the appearance of the angel at the tomb caused the women and even the guards to be struck with fear in those initial moments. The resurrection was a kind of seismic event in more ways than one. It upset the natural course of events. Death is supposed to be final. And despite the incredible joy and amazement of the resurrection, everything about Easter morning and the days that preceded it were disruptive. Despite the predictions Jesus had shared with the disciples, it was still difficult to process his betrayal and death on the cross. Since his death on Friday, the disciples were hunkered down in a house in Jerusalem. They were afraid of being taken in themselves. And that concern didn't just instantly vanish at the news of the resurrection. The dramatic course of events left them exhilarated but stunned, and maybe a bit numb in the days that followed. Have you ever been through a period of incredible change or disruption that left you feeling similar? Are you sometimes left exhausted and simply indifferent to what's happening around you? We've been living in times of pandemic, unstable domestic and foreign affairs, a kind of inability to share common truths and facts throughout society. All of it can leave people feeling a little bit numb. And yet we have access to endless streams of information, so much of it just amazing and entertaining. We see dramatic advancements and new technologies related to artificial intelligence, for example. A footnote that this Easter sermon and all of my sermons are written by me and not ChatGPT or any other AI chatbot. But there are just so many messages and so many changes we see that even for those who love paying attention to it all, it's hard to keep up with everything. And how do you deal with all of that? Do you follow it all? Focus only on specific areas or issues that are of, concern to you? Or do you just start to tune it all out after a while? I mean, it's tempting and sometimes necessary to do that. It's easy to settle into hearing what we want to hear or what we believe we already know and to just block the rest out. With so much noise and change and disruption, I think it's a natural response for us to just keep to ourselves, put some earbuds in, stick to our routine, focus on what we know. Nothing's going to change our world. While that may be an important coping mechanism and an initial way of handling stress and grief, the widespread impact of that, if it continues, can be seen. Weakened community, information silos, so much information and opinions that very little breaks through. Only the most hyped up, sensational, and polarizing messages do. We lose the ability to navigate nuanced relationships and the more complicated realities that we all face. So how do we solve that? How do we get beyond whatever silos we've placed ourselves in? In the midst of their own grief and numbness, two women on Easter morning show us how to begin. As Jesus' disciples are sheltering back in the house where they're staying, the two Marys who were close to Jesus go to see the tomb on Easter morning. Matthew says they just go and see. Other Gospels talk about how they brought various spices and preparations for Jesus' body, but Matthew doesn't get into any of those details. He emphasizes that they just go and see. It's that simple. They go from their place of protection and they venture out to see the tomb. And I mean, think about it. Going may have brought back pain for them. But they're seeking to work through their grief, and it's in doing so that they encounter new life. It's important to recognize the movement, the comings and goings that happen on Easter. Today's message is an encouragement to be curious like the women were, to go and see and perhaps even encounter new life emerging around us, to receive the peace God offers over the fears we're otherwise overwhelmed by, to experience the gift of new life that God offers. Resurrection isn't something we bring about. It's not something we summon or earn. It's something we ultimately receive as a gift. When we think of resurrection, we think of physical resurrection from death to life, and that's the ultimate promise of Easter. It's a central part of our hope in the message today, but that same pattern and that same gift of new life that comes out of death and despair and darkness can be experienced in our lives beginning today. So where and to what are you being called to go and see? Exploring can come with an element of excitement. It can also involve, at times, a little risk, danger maybe. It can stir up concerns. It can test our mental and emotional fortitude, or maybe even our physical stamina. What might going and seeing look like for you? Living a Christian life doesn't just mean learning a few prayers and teachings, but it positively informs and impacts our whole life. At All Saints, we talk about that all-encompassing or holistic understanding of the Christian faith in terms of our well-being, our wellness. Valuing and celebrating our physical well-being is important. So is developing our intellectual life and our emotional well-being, among other areas. Our spiritual life and faith integrate with all of this. Maybe for you, going and seeing might literally mean getting out on a physical adventure or recommitting to some regular exercise or walks or time spent in the midst of creation. A couple weeks ago, I had a special guest on my podcast. Allison Young is a former world-class musician and public radio host, but 4 years ago, she decided to take a leave from her job and take some time off to go on a major hike in New Zealand for 5 months. In our conversation, we talked about the spiritual connections to the language of journey. On another occasion, she did an 800-mile trek through the Arizona desert over 40 days during the season of Lent. she brought along a verse from Paul in Philippians 4 that was a continuing encouragement for her. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice. Do not worry about anything. And she said, that's so valuable to somehow be in a state of rejoicing and not worrying and living in this present space and having faith. It's extraordinarily difficult, but when you're tested and you're physically and mentally tested out on the trail, that's a hard thing to hang on to, but it's so valuable. She went on to say that on an extended hike, you change. You're given this opportunity to renew yourself, a sense of redefining who you are in relationship to the world, in relationship to the Spirit. We're given this opportunity every single day of our lives, but we don't always take it. A trail opens that up for you and gives you this space if you want to take it. Even something as simple as a walk through a park can give us that space. But we don't have to walk a physical path to find opportunities for renewal. Whenever we engage our physical being and explore, we open up our perspective. It helps us see some of the daily gifts of the creation that surround us and the renewal that's open to us in every moment. But another way we can venture out and go and see involves our intellectual life, exploring and cultivating curiosity about things we don't know a lot about, seeking wisdom. As I said earlier, it's natural with our overload of information to cut most of it out and just focus on what we like or can most easily relate to. It can be hard yet rewarding to challenge ourselves and see beyond the usual. That might involve spending time trying to understand those we don't agree with. We're just patiently listening to someone or a perspective that we don't immediately understand. Going deeper, learning new things can help us make connections in other areas of our life. When I listen to my son's experiences in college or my daughter who is in high school and hear their perspectives on life and the world, I learn from that. I feel like I still have things to share with them, but increasingly I feel like the balance is shifting and I have as much or more to learn through their eyes now. Some of their experiences are different than mine. Who are the people that you can go and see or listen to that can help you find new insight and renewal? Going and seeing also means learning more about what's happening around us in our society. If there are movements for change that you're confused by or maybe even concerned about, step out and go see. Learn more. Read some firsthand sources and testimonies of those who've been seeking that change. Talk to some friends who you might not fully agree with. Learn about your neighbors and at least do your part to build mutual care and respect and counter some of the expectations that there is no space for mutual understanding anymore. Let's be the ones to create it. In exploring some of the issues and challenges of our day from new perspectives, it's certainly possible that you're going to end up with some added discouragement too. But the story of Easter shows us that when we step out of our places of fear and grief and numbness, we give ourselves a chance to receive the gift of new life. When the angel instructs the women to go and tell the disciples that Jesus has been raised, they are filled with joy. On their way to the disciples, they have yet another encounter, this time not just with an angel, but with Jesus. And they have this beautiful moment and they receive another message. Jesus tells them not to be afraid, a final word of comfort and peace. And he tells them to go to the disciples and to tell them to go to Galilee where they will see him. So now the disciples are invited to go and see, and the movement continues. And here we are today, and all of us are part of this movement of faith this morning because of the women and the disciples who went to see and then shared what they experienced. In a world that sometimes feels stuck in entrenched divisions and sides, what would it be like if we answered the call to go and see, to increase our engagement with the world around us, especially the people and the parts we've been closed off to? through faith and continuing to move ahead in a spirit of curiosity and love and hope, God gives us the opportunity for renewal. That opportunity is always there for us. We can embrace the moment we're in regardless of our circumstances and seek gratitude and beauty and goodness. And as we explore faith more deeply along the way, the words, the stories, and the life of Jesus continue to give us fresh perspective. The reason for that is Jesus speaks to human struggles that aren't confined to any period in history. They cut to the core of our human condition, our joys, our aspirations, our struggles, and disappointments. We discover a spirit in Jesus that is built around loving neighbors that are not like us, nurturing gratitude, living courageously and selflessly. These are lessons that still seem incredibly relevant for whoever we are today. The story of Holy Week is still captivating 20 centuries later because when we journey through the hopes of Palm Sunday and on through the heartache of Good Friday and then experience the new life and resurrection of Easter Sunday, it equips us to know how to move through our own change and disappointment and loss and yet still keep our eyes open for new life. I pray that you will continue to set out with the curiosity and commitment of the women on Easter morning, to work through loss, to venture through the beauty of God's creation, to keep learning and not close yourself off, to seek understanding in one another, and to find the presence and hope of Jesus along the way. I'm convinced that if we do so, new life will meet us along the way. We have the hope of the resurrection. It begins now and continues forever. Christ is risen, risen indeed. Alleluia. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.